The federal hearing room carried the weight of institutional power in every polished surface. Mahogany panels rose from floor to ceiling, carved with eagles and scales of justice that had witnessed decades of testimony, confession, and occasionally, truth. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the floor where Marcus Langston stood in a charcoal suit he'd purchased 3 days earlier at a consignment shop, the price tag still a small violence against his bank account but necessary armor for this moment. The dossier rested on the table before him. 237 pages. 6 years compressed into documentation so meticulous that federal investigators had spent 3 weeks verifying every date, every dollar, every detail before agreeing this hearing was warranted. Behind him, Victoria Brennan sat in the witness section, her presence a declaration that had cost her everything she'd spent a decade building. The gallery held journalists, attorneys, and 7 of the 73 employees whose names appeared in the pages Marcus had compiled while the rest of Cleveland slept. Commissioner Rachel Jenkins adjusted her reading glasses and leaned forward. The microphone amplified her voice into something that filled every corner of the room. Mr. Langston, this documentation is extraordinarily comprehensive. Walk us through when and why you began this process. Marcus's fingers rested on the binder's edge. Somewhere in the back rows, a camera shutter clicked. His daughter Amara sat with Mrs. Patterson from next door, watching her father speak truth to power with the same steady calm he'd taught her every morning of her 7 years. The moment stretched, full of everything that had led here. January 15th, 2018. That was the day they stole my first innovation, a warehousing efficiency protocol that saved Morrison Distribution $42,000 in the first quarter alone. Derek Townsend presented it as his own work and received a $5,000 bonus. I realized then this wasn't personal, it was systematic, so I started documenting everything. Because I knew eventually someone would ask me to prove it, and in America, black men don't get the benefit of the doubt. We get the burden of proof. Commissioner Jenkins wrote something on her notepad. The scratch of pen on paper seemed impossibly loud in the silence that followed. And you continued this documentation for 6 years. Until I had enough evidence that even institutional inertia couldn't ignore it. Until 73 stories became undeniable pattern. Until $2.8 million in stolen wages and blocked promotions became federal case precedent instead of just another complaint buried in an HR file. The commissioner's eyes moved to Victoria, then back to Marcus. We'll hear from all witnesses, but first, Mr. Langston, I want to understand what kept you documenting for 6 years, instead of simply leaving for another employer. Marcus thought of Amara's gap-toothed smile, of rent checks that cleared with $17 to spare, of his wife Alicia's voice in his head saying courage isn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. Because leaving would have meant they were right about me, and they weren't. So I stayed, and I documented, and I waited for the moment when documentation mattered more than institutional power. That moment is now, Mr. Langston. Let's begin with January 2018. The screen behind him illuminated with the first page of evidence as the room settled into the kind of attention that precedes revelation. 5 months earlier, January 2024. The alarm clock's mechanical rasp cut through darkness at 5:30, same as every morning since Amara was born. Marcus silenced it before the second beep, habit from years of protecting small ears from jarring awakenings. The apartment held the particular cold of old Cleveland buildings in winter, radiators clanking to life but not yet warm enough to take the edge off the pre-dawn chill. He moved through the familiar choreography of morning. Feet touching worn carpet, the 3 steps to Amara's doorway to check her breathing, still a reflex from when she was infant small and terror lived in the space between heartbeats. She slept with one arm flung over her pillow, braids slightly askew from restless dreaming, the nightlight casting gentle shadows across her face. The kitchen smelled of old coffee grounds and the faint sweetness of yesterday's oatmeal. Marcus filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and pulled eggs from the refrigerator that hummed too loud and would need replacing soon. On the small table, bills waited in their deliberate stack. Rent notice on top, $847 due February 1st. Beneath it, the bank statement he'd retrieved yesterday showed $58 in checking. Another $127 in savings that couldn't be touched because emergencies were not hypothetical in single-father mathematics. The photograph sat on the narrow mantel, Alicia's face frozen in laughter from a moment 4 years and a lifetime ago. Beach sand, summer sun, her hand shading her eyes as she smiled at whoever held the camera, probably his mother, before the cancer took her too. Marcus didn't talk to the photo anymore, didn't need those conversations now. But sometimes in the morning, quiet, he'd glance at it and feel the particular ache of missing someone who'd known him completely. Your mama would be proud of you, he'd told Amara last night when she'd shown him her robotics project sketches, careful drawings of gears and pulleys that shouldn't make sense for a just-turned 7-year-old, but did because Amara inherited her mother's mind for systems. The kettle whistled. Marcus poured water over instant coffee grounds, the cheap kind that tasted like compromise but cost $4.99 instead of $12. In 8 hours, he'd be at Morrison Distribution Services, where the break room offered free coffee that somehow tasted worse than this. But free was free, and pride was expensive. Amara appeared in the doorway, sleep-rumpled and beautiful, wearing the purple pajamas with dinosaurs that were getting too small, but she refused to outgrow. "Morning, Daddy." "Morning, baby girl." He cracked eggs into the pan, watching them sizzle and set. "Scrambled or sunny side?" "Scrambled. With cheese if we have it." They had half a block of cheddar that would make it another week if rationed carefully. Marcus cut a thin slice and grated it over the eggs as they cooked, the smell filling the small kitchen with something close to abundance. Amara climbed into her chair, legs swinging, not quite reaching the floor. Marcus set the plate before her and sat across with his own portion, smaller because growing children needed fuel and fathers could survive on less. "Remember what we talked about?" He kept his voice gentle, the same tone he used for teaching rather than lecturing. "Hold my head high." She forked eggs into her mouth, cheeks puffing slightly. "No matter what anybody says about us." "That's right. Because other people's opinions don't define your worth. You define it. Through your actions, your kindness, your effort. Like how you work hard every day even when Mr. Townsend takes credit for your ideas." Marcus's hand paused halfway to his coffee cup. He'd tried to shield her from those details, but children absorbed everything, processed the undertones adults thought they hid. "Who told you about that?" "I heard you talking to Mrs. Patterson last week. You said Derek took your root thing and pretended it was his." Marcus set down the cup, met his daughter's eyes, Alicia's eyes, dark and perceptive, and impossible to deceive. "Yes, that happened, and it's happened before. But here's the thing, Amara. I keep doing good work anyway. Not for Mr. Townsend's approval. Not for recognition. Because the work matters. Because I know my value even when others refuse to see it. That's what holding your head high means. Understanding your worth doesn't depend on other people acknowledging it." She chewed thoughtfully, processing this in whatever way 7-year-old minds sorted moral complexity. "Is that why Mama married you? Because you know your worth?" The question landed with unexpected weight. Marcus smiled, despite the ache that always accompanied mentions of Alicia. "Your mama married me because I made her laugh. But she stayed married to me because we both believed the same thing. That dignity isn't given, it's claimed. every single day, in small ways and big ones. Amara nodded, satisfied with this answer, and returned to her breakfast. Marcus watched her, thinking about the world she'd inherit, wondering if he was preparing her adequately for battles she shouldn't have to fight but would. At 7:15, they left the apartment, Amara's backpack bouncing against her shoulders, Marcus's hand firm around hers as they descended 3 flights of stairs with railings that wobbled and tiles that cracked in patterns the landlord never repaired. Outside, January wind cut through their coats, but the walk to Amara's school was only 6 blocks, manageable in all but the worst weather. At the school gates, he knelt to Amara's eye level, adjusted her coat collar, and kissed her forehead. Learn everything. Ask questions. Be kind. Love you, Daddy. Love you more than the sky, baby girl. She ran toward the building, braids flying, and he watched until she disappeared inside because you never knew which goodbye might be the last one, and he'd learned not to take safety for granted. Morrison Distribution Services occupied a gray concrete building in Cleveland's industrial corridor, surrounded by parking lots and loading docks and the constant rumble of trucks moving goods across the Midwest. Marcus had worked here 8 years, knew every corridor, every shortcut, every person's coffee order, and which supervisors to avoid before 9 a.m. He clocked in at 8:03, the digital reader confirming his arrival with a beep that felt vaguely accusatory. His desk sat in the logistics coordination pool, 12 desks arranged in rows, each with an outdated computer monitor and a phone that rang constantly with drivers reporting delays, warehouses requesting pickup schedule changes, clients demanding explanations for problems that originated 3 departments away. Derek Townsend's desk faced Marcus's across the aisle. Derek had arrived at 7:45, not because he had more work, but because visibility mattered in corporate environments, and Derek understood performance theater better than actual performance. He glanced up as Marcus settled into his chair, offered the kind of smile that didn't reach eyes, and returned to scrolling through emails that probably didn't require scrolling. Big meeting today. Quarterly review. Caldwell's going to be there. Richard Caldwell, Senior Vice President of Operations, whose office occupied the executive floor and whose approval determined promotions, bonuses, and which employees mattered versus which were merely tolerated. Should be interesting. Marcus logged into his computer, waiting through the agonizing 30 seconds it took the ancient machine to load his desktop. His inbox showed 47 new messages, most urgent, all requiring responses that would take until noon if he worked without break. Patricia Whitmore walked past, coffee mug in hand, gray hair pulled back in a bun that had looked identical for the 12 years she'd worked in HR. She didn't look at Marcus, didn't slow her pace, but something in the set of her shoulders suggested awareness, the kind of peripheral attention that saw everything while appearing to notice nothing. Marcus opened the first email and began the daily grind of solving other people's logistical failures, while his own innovations gathered dust in digital folders no one bothered reviewing. The morning dissolved into the usual rhythm: emails answered, problems resolved, fires extinguished before they spread. At 9:30, Victoria Brennan's assistant circulated meeting invitations. Quarterly review, conference room B, 2 o'clock. Attendance mandatory. Marcus accepted the invitation, already knowing how the afternoon would unfold. PowerPoints celebrating metrics that multiple departments contributed to. Credit distributed unevenly. Questions asked in ways that made certain employees defensive, while allowing others to showcase expertise they'd borrowed from colleagues who'd never receive acknowledgement. He'd stopped expecting fairness. Expectation implied the possibility of surprise, and Marcus had learned that corporate discrimination was remarkably predictable once you understood the patterns. What they took from him, they'd taken from others. What they denied him, they'd denied systematically. Lunchtime arrived with its usual compromise: turkey sandwich from home, eaten at his desk while others went to the cafeteria. He used the 45 minutes to review a proposal he'd been developing for 3 weeks, a route optimization system that would reduce fuel costs by 15% and delivery delays by 23%, based on careful analysis of 6 months' worth of shipping data. The proposal was comprehensive. Charts showing current inefficiency patterns, algorithms for dynamic route adjustment based on real-time traffic data, cost projections demonstrating $47,000 annual savings in the first year alone, scaling to potentially $120,000 by year 3 as the system optimized through machine learning. Marcus had completed this analysis on his own time, using free statistical software and data sets he'd compiled from public sources. The proposal represented 60 hours of work, none of it compensated, all of it motivated by the stubborn belief that excellence eventually spoke louder than prejudice. He saved the file, attached it to an email addressed to Victoria Brennan, and typed a subject line. Route Optimization Proposal. Annual Savings, $47K plus. His finger hovered over the send button. Previous proposals had vanished into Victoria's inbox like messages thrown into vast ocean, acknowledged with generic replies about review timelines, then silence, then watching someone else implement identical ideas months later while receiving praise for innovation. Marcus had documented first but couldn't prove because digital timestamps were easy to manipulate for those with system access he didn't possess. But documentation required first submission. Marcus clicked send. The email disappeared into whatever void consumed his attempts at upward mobility. He finished his sandwich and returned to the 43 emails still requiring responses. At 2 o'clock, conference room B filled with the usual suspects. 20 employees from logistics, operations, and management, arranging themselves in the unconscious hierarchy of corporate spaces, executives near the front, coordinators like Marcus toward the back. Derek Townsend positioning himself strategically in the middle where Richard Caldwell could see his attentive nodding. Victoria Brennan stood at the presentation screen, laptop connected, PowerPoint ready. She was 34, had been regional supervisor for 3 years, and possessed the kind of confidence that came from never questioning whether she deserved her position. Her suit probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. Let's begin. Fourth quarter exceeded projections by 6%, revenue up, delivery times down, client retention at 93%. Strong performance across the board. The PowerPoint advanced through slides celebrating metrics Marcus had directly contributed to, but would never see his name attached to. Slide 7 showed reduced fuel costs, his route suggestions from last spring, implemented quietly without attribution. Slide 12 highlighted improved warehouse efficiency, his scheduling algorithm from September, now standard procedure though the training materials credited operations team collaboration. Derek raised his hand during the client retention discussion, asked a question designed to showcase his understanding of market dynamics, received approving nod from Caldwell. Marcus stayed silent, knowing questions from him would be interpreted differently, not engaged curiosity, but defensive challenge. The meeting droned through budget reviews, projections for next quarter, strategic priorities that sounded impressive but meant little beyond justifying executive salaries. Marcus's attention drifted to the window until Victoria's voice shifted tone slightly. Before we close, I want to recognize outstanding initiative. Derek Townsend has been working on something that could significantly impact our operational efficiency. Marcus's spine straightened. Derek stood, walked to the front, accepted the laptop connection from Victoria with a smile that suggested this moment was expected, rehearsed, arranged in advance. The slide appeared. Bold text. Route Optimization System. Annual Savings. 47K plus. Marcus's breath caught. The exact title, the exact number. He pulled out his phone, opened his sent email folder with hands that had gone cold, found the message to Victoria time-stamped 3 weeks ago at 1:47 p.m., the proposal attached. 47 pages of analysis Derek couldn't have produced. I've been analyzing our delivery patterns. Using real-time traffic data integration, we can reduce fuel costs by 15% and delivery delays by 23%. First-year savings of $47,000, scaling to $120,000 by year 3. Every word matched his proposal. Every metric, every projection, every algorithmic explanation Derek was now presenting with casual expertise that would evaporate under technical questioning he'd never face. Outstanding work, Derek. Richard Caldwell leaned forward, practically beaming. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. How soon can we implement? Pilot program could launch next month, full rollout by April. Excellent. I'm approving a $5,000 performance bonus. And let's discuss promotion possibilities. We need people like you in leadership positions. The room murmured approval. Several people congratulated Derek as he returned to his seat, basking in recognition for work he'd stolen so completely he'd probably convinced himself he'd actually done it. Marcus sat motionless. The rage that wanted to erupt had nowhere to go that wouldn't confirm every stereotype about angry black men who couldn't accept their place. His phone showed the timestamp proof, but timestamps meant nothing without system access to verify Derek had downloaded the file from the shared drive where Victoria's assistant had filed it 3 weeks ago. Patricia Whitmore sat 3 seats away, her face carefully neutral, but her eyes met Marcus's for one brief moment before sliding away. Something passed between them in that glance. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or shared understanding that certain truths were too dangerous to speak aloud in rooms where power held all the microphones. The meeting concluded with reminders about deadlines and encouragement to maintain fourth-quarter momentum. People filed out, several stopping to shake Derek's hand, congratulate his innovation, ask questions about implementation he'd need to research before answering because he hadn't done the actual analysis. Marcus remained seated, letting the room empty, staring at the presentation screen, now dark, but still showing the ghost of his work claimed by someone else. Victoria gathered her materials, glanced at him briefly. Was that guilt in her expression? And left without speaking. Derek paused at the door, looked back, smiled. Better luck next time, Marcus. Maybe if you'd submitted something yourself, you'd have gotten recognition too. The words landed with deliberate cruelty, challenging Marcus to respond, to escalate, to give Derek the confrontation that would paint Marcus as aggressive and Derek as victim. Marcus said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only dignity available. Derek left. The conference room exhaled into emptiness. Marcus sat alone with the familiar weight of injustice that felt less like surprise and more like confirmation of everything he'd learned about how institutions treated people who looked like him. His phone buzzed. Text message from unknown number. Storage room 4B, 6 p.m. You're not alone. Patricia. Marcus left the conference room and returned to his desk, the afternoon stretching into email responses and phone calls with drivers. The work continued because work always continued, regardless of theft or injustice or the slow accumulation of rage that had nowhere safe to discharge. At 4:30, Derek left for the day, waving to Richard Caldwell as he passed the executive offices. At 5:15, the logistics pool emptied except for Marcus and 2 coordinators who'd stay until 6 finishing reports. At 5:45, Marcus saved his files, logged out, and walked toward the stairwell that led to the building's lower level where storage rooms held archived files, outdated equipment, and the institutional memory companies preferred to bury rather than examine. Storage room 4B smelled of cardboard and dust and fluorescent lights that flickered in ways that should have been repaired years ago. Patricia Whitmore stood beside a table where 3 women waited, faces Marcus vaguely recognized from company events but couldn't name. Former employees, he realized, reading departure in their postures. Patricia gestured to the empty chair. Marcus sat. "Thank you for coming. I'm going to tell you some things HR directors aren't supposed to tell current employees, but I've been here long enough to know the difference between following rules and enabling harm." She pulled a USB drive from her purse, set it on the table with the weight of something dangerous. "That meeting today? Derek stealing your proposal? That was the 73rd time I've documented this pattern. 73 employees over 6 years, all black or women, all watching their work stolen, their promotions blocked, their contributions erased while colleagues received credit and advancement. 48 black employees, 25 white women, all experiencing the same systematic discrimination Morrison Distribution pretends doesn't exist." One of the women leaned forward. She was in her 50s, gray threading through dark hair, wearing the kind of tired expression that came from battles fought and lost. "I worked here 9 years, sales coordinator, developed 3 major client strategies that increased regional revenue by 18%. Every single strategy was given to Derek or someone like him. When I complained, they transferred me to the worst territory we had. Rural routes, low volume, impossible quotas. I lasted 6 months before I quit." The second woman nodded, younger, maybe early 30s. "I'm Jennifer. I was in operations. I documented 17 instances of my scheduling improvements being credited to male colleagues. When I went to HR, Patricia told me she'd investigate. What she didn't tell me then, but I understand now, was that she couldn't investigate because the system protected itself." The third woman stayed silent but slid a folder across the table toward Marcus. He opened it. Exit interview transcripts, names redacted but patterns screaming from every page. "This environment doesn't value my contributions. I was held to different standards than my colleagues. I watched less qualified employees receive opportunities I'd earned 3 times over." Page after page, voices speaking the same truth in different words, ignored individually but undeniable collectively. Patricia touched the USB drive. In 2018, a black employee named James Morrison filed a discrimination lawsuit. He had documentation showing his innovations were stolen 18 times in 3 years. He had witness testimony. He had emails. The company settled for $60,000, made him sign an NDA, and buried the whole thing. Gerald Hendricks in HR destroyed most of the related files. But I kept copies of everything, because I knew James wasn't alone. She pushed the USB drive across the table until it touched Marcus's hand. 73 cases. Documentation showing $2.8 million in stolen wages and blocked promotions over 6 years. Statistical analysis proving black employees receive average 2.3-minute performance reviews compared to 5.1 minutes for white employees. Salary disparities of $15,000 for identical positions based purely on race. Derek Townsend has received $127,000 in bonuses for work he didn't do. Marcus stared at this drive, this small piece of plastic containing institutional truth condensed into data. His hands remained flat on the table, not yet touching it, because touching it meant accepting responsibility for what came next. "Why show me this? Why now?" Patricia met his eyes directly. "Because you're different. James fought alone, and they crushed him with lawyers and settlement money. But you have an MBA from Case Western. Your thesis was on systemic discrimination in corporate environments. You've been documenting on your own for 3 years. I've seen the notes you keep, the timestamps, the careful records. You're not just angry, Marcus. You're prepared. And preparation matters more than rage when you're fighting institutions designed to protect themselves." The room held its breath. Outside, the building settled into evening quiet, cleaning crews beginning their rounds, security guards changing shifts. "What are you asking me to do?" "What you've been preparing to do since the day you realized this wasn't about you failing. It's about them failing you. Failing 73 people whose crime was expecting merit to matter more than melanin. I'm asking you to take this evidence, combine it with your own documentation, and build a case so airtight that even federal investigators can't ignore it. I'm asking you to be brave enough to stand up when standing up might cost you everything. Marcus picked up the USB drive. It weighed nothing physically but everything in terms of what accepting it meant. In his pocket, his phone held Amara's photo. He thought of Alicia, who'd never backed down from fights that mattered. I'll need time to review everything, to plan. Take the time you need, but Marcus? They're already planning Derek's promotion. Regional coordinator, $75,000 salary increase, based on his innovative contributions. That promotion should be yours. And if you don't act, they'll keep taking from you until there's nothing left. The women who'd shared their stories stood to leave. Jennifer touched Marcus's shoulder as she passed. You don't know me, and I don't know you, but I'm rooting for you. We all are. The ones who left, the ones who stayed silent, the ones who lost battles before realizing we were in a war. Don't let them break you the way they broke us. They left through the storage room's rear exit. Patricia gathered the folders, placed them in her bag, paused at the door. One more thing. That proposal Derek stole? Victoria Brennan's assistant filed it in the shared drive where anyone with manager credentials could access it. Derek downloaded it 2 days after you submitted. I have the server logs. When you're ready, I'll show you how deep this goes. She departed, leaving Marcus alone with the USB drive. He sat in the flickering light, thinking about the 73 employees whose stories were now his responsibility. About James Morrison, paid $60,000 to disappear. About his own 3 years of documentation, meticulous records he'd kept because Alicia had taught him that truth mattered even when no one listened. His phone buzzed. Text from Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor watching Amara. Honey, the school called. There's been an incident. They need you to come in tomorrow morning. Amara's okay but upset. Call me. Marcus's heart clenched. The school, an incident. Amara okay but upset, which meant someone had said something or done something that 7-year-olds shouldn't have to endure. He stood, pocketing the USB drive, the decision made not through logic but through instinct. They'd come for his daughter now, the institutional cruelty extending beyond him to the child he'd promised to protect. He texted back, "Coming home now. Don't tell her I know. I'll handle it." The walk through the empty building felt longer than usual, footsteps echoing in corridors that held the ghosts of 73 battles fought and lost. But Marcus wasn't those 73. He was the 74th. And he had something they hadn't: documentation, allies, preparation, and a daughter whose future depended on him refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. At the building's exit, he paused, looked back at Morrison Distribution Services, the gray concrete structure that had extracted 8 years of his labor while giving him crumbs in return. Soon, very soon, he'd return that extraction with interest. The January wind cut through his coat as he walked toward the bus stop. Inside his pocket, the USB drive pressed against his phone, 2 pieces of technology holding everything needed to dismantle 6 years of systematic discrimination. Above, the evening sky darkened toward night, stars invisible beneath Cleveland's industrial glow. He thought of Alicia's voice. Sometimes standing up means standing alone, but standing alone with truth is still standing. The bus arrived. Marcus climbed aboard, found an empty seat, and rode toward home thinking about storage rooms and stolen proposals and 73 people whose stories had just become his ammunition. The fight was coming. But first, he needed to see about his daughter. Mrs. Patterson opened the door before Marcus could knock, her face showing the particular worry that came from caring for other people's children when trouble arrived. She was 68, widowed, had lived in the apartment next door since Marcus moved in 7 years ago. and treated Amara like the granddaughter geography had denied her. She's been quiet since the call came. Wouldn't tell me what happened, just said she wanted you. Marcus moved past her into his own apartment where Amara sat on the couch, small and contained in a way that children her age shouldn't master yet. Her backpack remained zipped, homework untouched, the robotics sketches she'd been excited about that morning forgotten beside her. Baby girl. He sat beside her, not touching yet, giving her space to choose closeness. Mrs. Patterson said the school called. Amara's eyes fixed on her hands, fingers twisting together in patterns that mirrored her mother's nervous habits so precisely it hurt to witness. Tyler Brennan said you probably can't even read. That's why you do simple work instead of important jobs like his dad. The name landed with particular violence. Brennan. Victoria's nephew, Marcus realized, connecting details he'd filed away from parent-teacher conferences. 8 years old, same class as Amara, absorbing whatever poison his family dinners served about people who looked different. He said black people aren't as smart. That's why we live in old buildings and his family lives in a house with a pool. He said you should be grateful, Mr. Townsend lets you work there even though you're not very good. Marcus's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The rage that wanted to erupt had nowhere to go that wouldn't terrify the child who needed him calm. What did you say back? Nothing. Mrs. Grayson was right there. She heard everything. I looked at her and she just looked away. Like it was okay that he said those things as long as nobody made it awkward. 7 years old and already learning that adults would fail her when protection mattered most. Marcus pulled Amara close, felt her small body shake with tears she'd been holding since the moment happened. That boy was wrong. About me, about you, about everything his ignorance taught him to believe. And that teacher failed you. Tomorrow morning, we're going to that school, and I'm going to make sure they understand that failure has consequences. Amara looked up, eyes red but fierce. Will they listen? They'll listen, because your father might work a job that boy thinks is simple, but I know words that turn silence into accountability. And I've been holding those words back too long. Morning arrived with the particular dread that accompanied necessary confrontations. Marcus dressed carefully, the suit he wore to funerals and job interviews he never got, pressed shirt, tie his mother had given him before the cancer, shoes polished to the kind of shine that said this man respected himself, even if others didn't. Amara wore her favorite dress, purple with white flowers, armor of her own choosing. The school smelled the way schools always smelled, industrial cleaner and pencil shavings, and the faint sweetness of cafeteria breakfast. Marcus held Amara's hand as they walked past classrooms where other children learned things his daughter would learn alongside them if adults did their jobs properly. Principal Donovan's office occupied the administrative wing's corner, windows overlooking the playground where children were currently having recess. The secretary, a woman in her 50s whose nameplate read Barbara Thompson, looked up with the polite but wary expression receptionists perfected when black men arrived unscheduled. Mr. Langston, we weren't expecting you until this afternoon. I decided morning was better. Is Principal Donovan available? He's in a meeting. Then he can include me in that meeting. This concerns my daughter's safety, and safety doesn't wait for convenient scheduling. Something in Marcus's tone made Barbara reach for the phone. 2 minutes later, Principal Donovan emerged, 50s, graying hair, wearing the kind of cardigan that suggested approachability while maintaining administrative distance. Mr. Langston, come in, please. Amara, you can wait with Mrs. Thompson. No, she's part of this conversation. She's the one who experienced harm. She deserves to witness how adults respond when children are hurt. Donovan's office reflected the aesthetic of someone who'd stopped noticing his surroundings a decade ago. Generic motivational posters, photographs of classes past, filing cabinets that probably contained complaints documented and subsequently ignored. He gestured to chairs across from his desk, Marcus and Amara sat. I understand there was an incident yesterday involving Tyler Brennan and some inappropriate comments. Racist comments. Comments questioning my intelligence, my worth, and by extension, my daughter's belonging in this school. Comments your teacher heard directly and chose not to address in the moment they occurred. Donovan's expression shifted into the careful neutrality of administrators who'd learned that admitting fault created liability. Mrs. Grayson reported that she heard Tyler make some unfortunate remarks. She planned to address it privately with him after class, but by then Amara had already become upset. We take these matters seriously, Mr. Langston. Tyler will receive appropriate discipline. What discipline? We'll have a conversation with his parents. He'll write an apology. A conversation, an apology, for teaching my daughter that the world sees her as less than, that adults with power will watch her be degraded and respond with paperwork and performative contrition. I understand your frustration, but we need to be mindful of both children's well-being. Tyler is also learning and growing. Harsh punishment might not be the answer. Marcus leaned forward, voice dropping into the register that demanded attention without raising volume. My daughter is 7 years old. Yesterday she learned that she can be insulted based on her father's race in front of a teacher who will do nothing. Today you're telling me the consequence for that harm is a conversation and a letter. What you're actually teaching her is that her dignity matters less than the comfort of the child who attacked it. That's not discipline. That's permission. Mr. Langston, I assure you we don't tolerate racism in this school. You're tolerating it right now. By minimizing it, by focusing on the aggressor's growth rather than my daughter's harm, by asking me to accept inadequate response because holding an 8-year-old accountable for racism his family taught him might be uncomfortable. Donovan's jaw tightened, irritation cracking through administrative compassion. Perhaps we should discuss how to help Amara be less sensitive. Not every comment requires escalation. Children need resilience. The words hung in the air, their implication clear. The problem wasn't racism. It was Amara's response to racism. Marcus stood, took Amara's hand, and looked down at Donovan with the full weight of restrained fury. My daughter is not the problem. Her sensitivity is appropriate response to inappropriate behavior. The fact that you're asking a 7-year-old black girl to develop resilience to racism, instead of asking your staff to not tolerate racism, tells me everything about this institution's priorities. We're leaving now, but understand this. I'm documenting every part of this conversation. And if my daughter experiences harm again, because your school values comfort over justice, you'll discover that I have resilience too, the kind that doesn't accept injustice quietly. He walked out before Donovan could respond. In the hallway, Barbara Thompson avoided eye contact. Marcus and Amara exited into morning sunshine that felt too bright for the darkness of what they'd just experienced. Daddy, are they going to make it better? No, baby girl, they're not. That's why we have to be strong enough to protect ourselves when institutions won't. That night, after Amara fell asleep, Marcus sat at the dining table with Patricia's USB drive and his laptop. The apartment was silent except for the radiator's periodic clanking and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. He inserted the drive, watching files populate the screen, spreadsheets, scanned documents, exit interviews, email chains, statistical analyses that Patricia had compiled over 12 years of watching patterns most people refused to see. Marcus opened the first spreadsheet. 73 names, employment dates, positions, departure dates, departure reasons. 48 black employees, 25 white women. Average tenure, 4.2 years for minorities versus 8.7 for white men. The numbers told a story that individual experiences couldn't articulate as clearly. systematic difference that couldn't be explained by performance or qualifications. He cross-referenced salary data. Black employees at Morrison Distribution earned average $15,000 less than white employees in identical positions with comparable experience. Performance review duration averaged 2.3 minutes for black employees compared to 5.1 minutes for white employees, documented in calendar systems that couldn't lie even when supervisors did. Promotion rates revealed the starkest disparity. Over 6 years, 2.3% of black employees received promotions compared to 18.7% of white employees. The statistical improbability of this occurring randomly exceeded 99.7%, meaning institutional design rather than individual bias explained the outcomes. Marcus had written his MBA thesis on exactly this kind of analysis, using quantitative methodology to prove patterns that qualitative testimony alone couldn't establish. His academic training, which Morrison Distribution didn't know he possessed because he'd never mentioned it on his application, had prepared him for precisely this moment. He created new spreadsheet, pulling data from Patricia's files and combining it with his own documentation from 3 years of careful record-keeping. Every proposal he'd submitted, time-stamped. Every meeting where his contributions were ignored, noted with date and attendees. Every performance review where exceeds expectations became meets expectations after Gerald Hendricks took over HR in 2019. The pattern emerged with crystalline clarity. Morrison Distribution had systematic problem, not individual bad actors. The institution itself was designed to advantage certain employees while disadvantaging others, and that design was documented in ways that federal investigators couldn't dismiss. Marcus worked until 3 a.m., building the foundation of what would eventually become 237 pages. His eyes burned and his back ached from hours hunched over the laptop, but the work felt necessary in ways that sleep didn't. Somewhere in Cleveland, 73 former employees were trying to rebuild careers that Morrison Distribution had damaged. James Morrison was bound by NDA that prevented him from warning others, and Amara was learning lessons about resilience that no 7-year-old should need. When Marcus finally closed the laptop, dawn was beginning to gray the windows. He looked at Alicia's photograph on the mantel. "I'm doing it. The thing you always said I should do. Fighting back with documentation instead of just enduring. I hope I'm doing it right." The photograph offered no answer, but the silence felt less empty than usual. Mid-March arrived with the false promise of spring that Cleveland specialized in. 3 days of warmth, followed by snow that reminded everyone winter wasn't finished yet. Marcus had spent 2 weeks working nights, building his case with the methodical precision his thesis methodology demanded. He'd calculated exact dollar amounts of stolen wages for each of the 73 employees. He'd cross-referenced performance reviews against actual contributions, proving that evaluation criteria shifted depending on employee race. He'd documented instances where identical mistakes received different consequences based on who made them. Saturday morning, Marcus took Amara to the Cleveland Science Center, let her lose herself in exhibits about robotics and physics. They ate lunch from the truck parked outside, expensive but earned through overtime Marcus shouldn't have needed to work but did, and walked through the park where March hinted at spring without delivering it. The grocery store visit was necessity, not choice. Rent had cleared Monday, leaving $173 for 2 weeks of food, utilities, and whatever unexpected expenses emerged from single parenting's chaos. Marcus shopped with the strategic precision of someone who'd learned that meal planning saved money that impulse purchases destroyed. Amara walked beside the cart, occasionally adding items they'd discussed in advance. Carrots, apples, the cereal that cost $4.99 instead of $3.49 but was the one thing she'd requested. In the candy aisle, she didn't touch anything, had learned years ago that their budget didn't include spontaneous sweets, but she looked at the chocolate bars with the longing children couldn't hide. Maybe next month. Marcus touched her head gently. I know. She smiled, resilient in ways that broke his heart. They were in the checkout lane when the woman's voice cut through ambient noise. Excuse me? Your daughter took something? Marcus turned. White woman, late 50s, expensive coat, carrying the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. She pointed at Amara with the certainty of someone whose accusations had always been believed. I saw her put something in her pocket. A candy bar. Every person in adjacent lanes stopped, attention focusing on the spectacle. Amara's face crumbled, tears immediate, the accusation landing with the force of public humiliation. My daughter didn't take anything. Marcus kept his voice level despite the rage boiling beneath. I know what I saw. Check her pockets. I'm not checking my daughter's pockets to satisfy your assumption. If you have a concern, speak to management. The woman's face flushed. She gestured to the security guard who'd started drifting toward the commotion, a man in his 30s whose hand moved instinctively toward the radio clipped to his belt. This man's daughter stole merchandise. I witnessed it. I demand she be searched. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and began recording. The guard stopped advancing, suddenly aware that whatever happened next would have digital evidence. My name is Marcus Langston. It's March 18, 2024, approximately 11:47 a.m. This woman has just accused my 7-year-old daughter of theft without evidence. I'm recording to document what happens next. Amara, show them your pockets. Amara turned her pockets inside out. Empty. The woman's certainty wavered but didn't collapse. She must have put it back when I wasn't looking. Or you were wrong, which means you just publicly humiliated a child based on assumption rather than fact. I expect an apology. I don't apologize for being vigilant. Vigilant. Interesting word for presuming guilt because my daughter's skin color matched your prejudice. The security guard stepped back, reading the situation's trajectory. Other shoppers had their phones out now too, some recording. The woman muttered something about political correctness and hurried away. The guard offered weak apology about misunderstandings. Marcus stopped recording, paid for groceries with hands that shook from adrenaline he couldn't discharge safely, and walked Amara to the car. Did I do something wrong? Her voice was tiny, crushed. Marcus knelt in the parking lot, holding her face gently. You did nothing wrong. That woman made assumptions based on ignorance. They were wrong. All of them. And the fact that you even have to ask if you're the problem shows how much damage these moments cause. But hear me, Amara. Their prejudice doesn't define your worth. Their failure doesn't become your shame. She nodded, but understanding at 7 meant different things than understanding would mean at 17. She was learning lessons no child should learn, this young, developing armor she shouldn't need yet. Victoria Brennan had stopped at the coffee shop adjacent to the grocery store, needing caffeine and the particular solitude that came from being alone in public spaces. She sat by the window, laptop open, reviewing reports that should have been finished Friday. Through the glass, she watched the scene unfold. Couldn't hear the words, but read the body language. The woman pointing, the security guard approaching, Marcus pulling out his phone with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned documentation was survival. She watched the child's face crumble, watched Marcus kneel afterward in the parking lot, watched father and daughter sit in their car for long minutes before driving away. Something shifted inside Victoria's chest, uncomfortable recognition that wouldn't settle back into ignorance. She'd seen Marcus at work for 3 years, never really seen him, treated him as competent employee without considering what competence cost when excellence was never enough. That evening, alone in her apartment that overlooked downtown Cleveland with views that cost $2,400 monthly, Victoria opened her laptop and pulled up personnel files she had access to as regional supervisor. Marcus Langston, 8 years employment. Logistics coordinator, level 3, Salary, $52,000 annually. She scrolled through performance reviews. 2016. Exceeds expectations. Strong analytical skills. 2017. Consistent high performance. Recommended for advancement. 2018. Excellent work. Ready for promotion consideration. 2019. Maintains high standards. Further development needed. 2020. Solid performance. Continue current trajectory. 2021. Meets expectations. Not yet ready for advancement. The language shifted subtly around 2019, when Gerald Hendricks had become HR director. Exceeds became meets. Recommended for advancement became not yet ready. Nothing overt, nothing actionable, just slow erosion of opportunity through carefully coded language. She opened Derek Townsend's file for comparison. 5 years employment. Same position. Same level. Salary, $67,000. Performance reviews consistently praised initiative and innovation. 2 promotions. 3 major bonuses totaling $38,000. Victoria's stomach turned. The coffee shop scene replayed, Marcus's daughter's face crumbling under false accusation, while her father protected her with dignity Victoria had never needed, because no one had ever assumed she was criminal by default. She opened old email folders, searched for Patricia Whitmore's name, found memos from 2019 and 2020 and 2021 she vaguely remembered receiving, and certainly hadn't read carefully. Recommend internal review of promotion practices. Statistical disparities emerging. 3 minority employees exited this quarter citing discrimination. Request investigation. Attached analysis shows concerning patterns in salary distribution by demographic. Victoria's signature appeared on each. Noted. Will review Q4. Promises never kept. Investigations never launched. Patterns never addressed because addressing them would mean admitting complicity. Her phone showed 11:47 p.m. She picked it up, stared at her father's contact information, hesitated, then called. He answered on the 3rd ring, voice groggy. Victoria, everything okay? Dad, when I applied for the supervisor position at Morrison, did you help me get it? Silence stretched. She heard him shifting, processing the question's unexpected arrival. Why are you asking this now? Because I need to know. Did you make calls, use connections, give me advantage others didn't have? Sweetheart, that's how the world works. I spent 30 years building relationships. Using them to help my daughter isn't corruption, it's networking. But did others have the same networking? Did black candidates have fathers who played golf with regional VPs? You earned that position. Your qualifications. Dad, I'm not asking if I was qualified. I'm asking if qualification was enough, or if I needed your help to overcome barriers that other people faced without similar help. Another pause, longer this time. Yes. I made calls, recommended you highly. Did that give you advantage? Probably. But Victoria, everyone with privilege uses it. You can't blame yourself for being born into family that could help you succeed. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling comfortable foundations of self-perception crack. What if I told you we have employees who've worked longer, performed better, contributed more, but never get promoted because they don't have fathers making calls? Then you'd be naive. The world isn't fair. You work with what you're given. What if working with what we're given means perpetuating harm? Her father's voice hardened. Don't let guilt make you weak. You earned your success. The fact that others didn't succeed isn't your responsibility. Victoria hung up without goodbye, staring at her apartment's expensive walls, thinking about Marcus in the parking lot teaching his daughter to hold her head high, while Victoria had spent 3 years holding hers high without questioning the ladder she'd climbed. Monday morning, Marcus arrived at Morrison Distribution early, bypassing his usual desk route to head directly to the 3rd floor where HR offices occupied space deliberately distant from employees who might need them. Gerald Hendricks' door stood open, the man himself visible through the glass partition. Marcus knocked, didn't wait for invitation. entered with the confidence of someone who'd stopped caring whether confidence was interpreted as aggression. "Mr. Langston, I don't think we have meetings scheduled." "We didn't. Now we do. I'm requesting my complete personnel file, including all performance reviews, salary adjustment justifications, and promotion consideration documentation." Gerald leaned back, studying Marcus with new attention. "That's within your rights. I'll have it prepared by end of week. End of day would be better. I'm also requesting information about compensation bands for my position level. That information is proprietary. We don't share salary details across employee base." "Interesting. Because Derek Townsend mentioned last month that he received $15,000 adjustment last year. Either he's violating your confidentiality policy, or you're using that policy selectively to prevent transparency that might reveal discrimination. Are you making formal complaint?" "I'm requesting information I'm entitled to. If that makes you nervous, perhaps you should examine why transparency feels threatening." Marcus left before Gerald could respond. Back at his desk, Patricia Whitmore appeared mid-morning, dropping folder that looked official but whose contents Marcus recognized immediately. Server access logs showing Derek's downloads from the shared drive, time-stamped proof of work theft. "Spring cleaning. These accidentally fell out of my file cabinet. If someone happened to find them, I suppose they could use them however they saw fit." She walked away before Marcus could respond. He opened the folder, saw the evidence laid out with clarity that could survive legal scrutiny. 14 instances over 3 years. Derek accessing Marcus's proposals within days of submission, downloading complete files, then submitting identical work under his own name. Marcus photographed every page, uploaded them to encrypted cloud storage, then slipped the folder into his desk drawer. Evidence was accumulating. Patricia's USB drive at home contained institutional scope. These logs provided specific proof. His MBA thesis methodology would structure it into legal framework. Late April arrived with exhaustion that came from living double life, employee by day, investigator by night. Marcus's dining table had transformed into command center, laptops surrounded by printouts and spreadsheets and legal pads filled with notes that mapped institutional discrimination with precision. He'd spent 6 weeks analyzing Patricia's data, cross-referencing it with public records, building statistical models that showed patterns too consistent to be coincidence. The document was growing, now 180 pages, heading toward 237. Introduction. Laying out scope. Methodology section describing analytical approach. Case studies of specific employees. Statistical analysis proving systematic nature. Legal framework citing Title VII and federal case precedents. Patricia had connected him with an attorney who specialized in employment discrimination. Catherine Mills, 53, who'd spent 20 years fighting corporations, had reviewed Marcus's documentation with focused attention that suggested professional respect. "This is extraordinary work. The methodology alone would hold up in federal court. If you're willing to file complaint, I'll represent you pro bono, and I'll make sure it goes directly to Department of Justice instead of getting buried in EEOC bureaucracy." Marcus had asked about risk. "They'll fight. They'll question your competence, suggest you're disgruntled employee. They'll try to find anything in your history that undermines credibility. But if you're prepared for that, if you have support system that can sustain you through investigation, then we can win this. Not just for you, for all 73. He'd said yes. Filed the complaint April 25th. DOJ had confirmed receipt, assigned case number, promised preliminary review within 30 days. The machinery of federal investigation was beginning its slow grind. But Marcus hadn't told anyone at Morrison Distribution. He'd filed silently, strategically, understanding that institutions fought hardest when they saw threats coming. Gerald Hendricks discovered Marcus's information request Wednesday morning when IT flagged unusual patterns in file access. Employee personnel file downloaded completely. Salary band data queried multiple times. Historical complaint records attempted access. Server logs reviewed in detail. The pattern suggested documentation building. Gerald had seen it before. Employee preparing lawsuit, gathering evidence. James Morrison had done same thing in 2018, though less sophisticated. Gerald had anticipated that complaint, prepared defense, negotiated settlement that made problem disappear for $60,000. This felt different. Marcus had requested files with precision that suggested legal training. Gerald pulled Derek Townsend's file, reviewed the innovation bonuses, saw the dates they'd been awarded. If someone investigated carefully, they'd find Marcus's work beneath Derek's name. Gerald picked up phone, dialed Richard Caldwell's extension. "We have situation developing. Marcus Langston is asking questions, requesting files, showing patterns consistent with legal preparation." Caldwell's voice came through with irritation. "How solid is his case? If he has documentation, it could be problematic. Derek's bonuses are vulnerable if anyone reviews timing. The 2018 Morrison settlement creates precedent. Derek's father is on our advisory board, major investor. We can't have this blowing up. Handle it. Quietly. Performance review showing he's not meeting standards. Reassignment to position that encourages voluntary exit. Make staying untenable until leaving looks like his choice." Gerald hung up, staring at Marcus's file, knowing what came next would either solve problem or create bigger one. Victoria saw Marcus in parking lot Thursday evening, later than usual, carrying laptop bag. She'd been leaving her own late evening, driven by reports that seemed endless and motivation that had become unclear. She almost didn't stop, almost drove past, maintained professional distance. But the grocery store scene still played in her mind, and her father's voice explaining how privilege worked and the memos from Patricia she'd ignored. Victoria parked, walked toward Marcus before courage could fail. "Marcus, can we talk?" He stopped, face showing the particular weariness that came from battles fought without rest. "About what?" "About Derek. About the proposal. About things I should have questioned 3 years ago but was too comfortable to examine." His expression didn't soften, but curiosity flickered. "Why now?" "Because I saw you at the grocery store. Saw that woman accuse your daughter. Saw how you had to defend her against assumption that never would have touched her if she looked different. And I realized I've been part of system that creates those assumptions. Realization is easy. Action is harder. What are you actually offering?" Victoria's hands clenched around her keys. "I pulled your file. Compared it to Derek's. The disparities are obvious once I looked. I found memos Patricia sent me years ago that I never read carefully. I'm starting to understand that Morrison Distribution has systematic problem, and I've been signing off on policies that perpetuate it." Marcus studied her face, searching for sincerity beneath guilt. "Patricia gave you USB drive?" "No. But I know she documents things HR tries to bury. I know there's evidence of institutional discrimination, and I know that if I support you publicly, I lose everything. But staying silent means accepting I'm part of harming people who deserve better." "This isn't about you, Victoria. Your guilt doesn't help 73 employees who've been systematically denied opportunity. So before you offer support, understand that real support costs something. It means risking your comfort to defend truth that makes you uncomfortable." Victoria's eyes filled, but tears didn't fall. "I know. And I'm afraid. But I'm more afraid of staying silent and becoming person who knew better, but chose comfort anyway." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, not forgiveness, but recognition. "I've filed complaint with Department of Justice. Federal investigation into Morrison Distribution's employment practices. 237 pages documenting 6 years of systematic discrimination. If you actually want to help, there's something you need to know. Gerald Hendricks has been burying complaints for 6 years. Richard Caldwell approved settlements with NDAs. They're currently discussing how to push me out before investigation makes them answer uncomfortable questions. Victoria's face went pale. When? Investigation could start any time in next 30 days. When it starts, everyone involved in perpetuating discrimination becomes target. If you actually want to help, you need to decide whether you're willing to testify honestly about what you've seen and what you've ignored, because testimony that protects yourself will be useless. He walked to his car. Victoria stood in parking lot as evening darkened, facing decision that would determine who she actually was versus who she'd believed herself to be. Friday night, Marcus helped Amara with homework that was becoming more complex as second grade progressed toward third. Daddy, what happens if you lose your job? Marcus looked up from the math worksheet. Why are you asking? Kids at school say their parents talk about your job, that you're making trouble, that maybe the company will fire you. The rage Marcus had been containing threatened to surface. His daughter was absorbing community speculation about her father's employment stability. I'm not losing my job, and if I did, we'd figure it out together. But more importantly, baby girl, I'm not making trouble. I'm addressing trouble that already existed. When people call someone troublemaker for pointing out injustice, they're really saying they prefer comfort to truth. But comfort built on other people's harm isn't peace. It's just delayed accountability. Is accountability when people have to answer for bad things? Exactly. And sometimes good people have to risk comfort to make sure accountability happens. Are you scared? Marcus pulled her close, feeling the weight of honesty that fatherhood demanded. Yes. Scared of losing income that pays our rent. Scared of retaliation, but you know what I'm more scared of? Teaching you to accept injustice quietly. Showing you that comfort matters more than courage. That scares me more than unemployment. Because jobs come and go, but character is forever. She hugged him tightly. Mama would be proud of you. Your mama would have done this years ago. I'm just finally learning the lessons she tried to teach me. After Amara fell asleep, Marcus sat at the dining table reviewing documentation one final time. His phone buzzed. Text from Victoria Brennan. I found something, not just current discrimination. Document destruction. Gerald ordered HR files purged 3 times since 2018. Email evidence. Federal crime. Can we talk? Somewhere they're not listening. Marcus stared at the message. Document destruction meant obstruction of justice. Gerald wasn't just enabling discrimination. He was actively concealing it through criminal means. Victoria had evidence, which meant she'd been digging through files she wasn't supposed to access. He typed response. Tomorrow, 9 p.m. Pete's Diner on Cedar Avenue. Come alone. Her reply came immediately. I'll be there. Marcus, I'm sorry it took this long, but I'm here now, for whatever that's worth. Marcus set down the phone and looked at Alicia's photograph, imagining what she'd say about allies who arrived late but arrived nonetheless. She'd probably say, judge them by actions going forward, not words looking back. The fight was no longer coming. It had arrived. And tomorrow night, in a diner on Cedar Avenue, Victoria Brennan would either prove her transformation was genuine or reveal that even awakened allies preferred comfortable lies to dangerous truths. The USB drive sat in his desk drawer. The 237 pages existed in encrypted cloud storage. The federal complaint had been filed. Marcus worked until exhaustion forced sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring conversation that might change everything. Outside, Cleveland settled into night. Inside, Marcus prepared for the next battle in a war he hadn't chosen, but refused to lose. Amara slept peacefully in the next room, protected for now from knowing how much her father was risking to build a world where her skin color wouldn't determine her opportunities. Marcus sat in the darkness, listening to his daughter breathe, thinking about Pete's diner tomorrow and federal investigators next month, and the long road between now and justice. The moment was arriving, and Marcus Langston was ready. Pete's Diner occupied a corner lot on Cedar Avenue where East Cleveland transitioned into neighborhoods that gentrification hadn't reached yet. The building had served coffee and comfort food since 1967. Vinyl booths patched with duct tape, fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, and the kind of anonymity that came from being too unfashionable for professionals who preferred downtown establishments. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, chose a booth in the back corner where conversations wouldn't carry to adjacent tables, ordered coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since afternoon shift. The waitress, name tag reading Dolores, maybe 60, wearing the exhausted expression of someone working third job, refilled his cup without asking and left him to the silence of waiting. Victoria entered at 9 exactly, scanning the diner until she spotted him, then walking with careful posture of someone entering territory that felt foreign. She'd dressed down, jeans, plain jacket, none of the professional armor she wore at Morrison Distribution, but still carried herself with unconscious confidence that came from never questioning whether spaces were meant for her. She slid into the booth across from Marcus, declined Dolores's offer of coffee, then pulled laptop from her bag with hands that shook slightly. "Thank you for meeting me." Marcus gestured for her to continue, not offering reassurance, understanding this conversation needed to move quickly through whatever revelation had driven her to risk being seen with employee who'd filed federal complaint. Victoria opened the laptop, turned it so they could both see the screen, and pulled up email folder Marcus recognized immediately. Internal HR communications that supervisors weren't supposed to access without authorization. April 2019. Gerald Hendricks to IT Director. Per our conversation, please purge all HR complaint files older than 18 months. Retention policy update, effective immediately. She scrolled. November 2021. Gerald to his assistant. Remove the Morrison settlement files from active storage. Archive off-site with other closed matters. Except closed matters are supposed to remain in system for 7 years. Off-site archiving means they're functionally disappeared. Another scroll. March 2023. Gerald to Richard Caldwell. Completed quarterly file review. 3 complaints regarding discriminatory practices have been resolved through counseling. Documentation has been minimized per our protocol. Minimized. That's code for destroyed. Marcus leaned forward, reading the dates, the language, the careful documentation of institutional cover-up that Gerald had been arrogant enough to preserve in email because he'd never imagined anyone would look. "How did you get access to these?" "I'm regional supervisor. I have back-end access to HR systems for emergency situations. I spent last 3 nights going through archived folders. Found these in Gerald's deleted items. He thought deleting them made them disappear, but server backup retains everything for 36 months. She pulled out printed copies of each email, 17 pages documenting systematic evidence destruction spanning 6 years. Marcus photographed each page with his phone, uploading them to encrypted storage because Victoria's courage might evaporate when consequences became real. This is federal crime. Obstruction of justice. If DOJ investigators find this, Gerald doesn't just lose his job, he goes to prison. Victoria's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "I know. That's why I'm showing you. Gerald needs to answer for this. Richard Caldwell needs to answer for approving it, and I need to answer for signing policies that enabled it, even if I didn't read them carefully enough to understand what I was enabling." Marcus studied her face, searching for performance beneath sincerity. "Why now? You could have stayed quiet, protected your career." "Because I saw your daughter's face in that parking lot." Because I read 73 exit interviews from people who left Morrison Distribution believing they'd failed when actually the institution failed them. Because my father told me the world isn't fair and I should work with what I'm given, and I realized that's exactly how injustice perpetuates. Good people working with systems that harm others while telling themselves it's not their responsibility. She closed the laptop, met his eyes directly. I'm going to testify. When DOJ investigators arrive, I'm going to tell them everything I know, everything I ignored, everything I should have questioned years ago. I'm going to submit these emails as evidence of document destruction, and I'm going to accept whatever consequences come from admitting I was part of the problem. Marcus felt something shift. Not forgiveness, but recognition that allies arrived imperfectly and refusing their help because it came late meant fighting alone. Federal investigators will be here soon, maybe next week, maybe next month. When they arrive, Morrison Distribution's leadership will panic. They'll try to destroy more evidence, pressure witnesses, create narrative that paints me as disgruntled employee. That's when your testimony matters most. What do you need from me? Access to any other files showing discriminatory patterns, salary data by demographic, promotion rates over time, performance review documentation. Victoria nodded, already opening laptop again, pulling up files she'd apparently prepared in advance. They worked until midnight, Marcus copying everything Victoria could access, building evidence mountain that would bury Morrison Distribution's carefully maintained fiction. In the parking lot afterward, Victoria paused before getting into her car. Marcus, I don't expect forgiveness. I especially don't expect you to absolve me of responsibility for harm I caused through negligence. I'm doing this because it's right, not because it makes me feel better. And when this is over, I hope you get everything you deserve. Marcus watched her drive away, thinking about Alicia's voice saying that people reveal themselves through actions under pressure. Victoria had just handed him evidence that could destroy her career while knowing it wouldn't restore her innocence. That kind of sacrifice suggested transformation might be genuine. The following week moved with surreal normalcy. Marcus coordinated logistics, responded to emails, attended meetings where Derek Townsend continued receiving praise. Gerald Hendricks smiled in hallways, unaware that his email archive was currently residing in federal complaint file. Richard Caldwell approved budgets, confident that settlements had permanently buried institutional problems. But underneath surface routine, machinery was turning. Catherine Mills had submitted the document destruction evidence to DOJ with recommendation for expedited investigation. Federal prosecutors were reviewing 237 pages alongside 17 pages of obstruction evidence. Somewhere in bureaucratic depths, decisions were being made about when to deploy investigators. Patricia Whitmore stopped by Marcus's desk Thursday morning, dropped folder containing updated server logs showing Derek had accessed Marcus's latest proposal 3 days ago. Spring cleaning continues. These just appeared. Terrible how patterns persist. The quarterly meeting was scheduled for May 21st. Marcus calculated timing. If Derek presented stolen work in public forum with 200 employees watching, and if Victoria was willing to make her support explicit in that moment, and if Marcus was prepared to sacrifice whatever comfort remained, then maybe public confrontation would force reckoning that bureaucratic investigation might delay. He sent encrypted message to Catherine Mills. Stolen work being presented, May 21st company meeting. Good timing for public documentation? Her response came within the hour. Perfect timing. DOJ investigators are scheduled to arrive May 23rd. Public confrontation on 21st establishes real-time harm. Marcus forwarded the information to Victoria with simple question. Are you ready? Her reply, yes. What do you need me to do? Just be honest. When the moment comes, choose truth over comfort. May 21st arrived with cloudless sky that felt like mockery of the storm about to break, inside Morrison Distribution's second-floor conference center. Marcus dressed carefully that morning, the funeral suit, the tie his mother had given him, shoes polished to mirror shine. Amara noticed, asked why he looked so fancy for regular workday. Sometimes you dress for the moment you're creating, not the moment you're in. Today's that kind of day. Are you going to be okay? I'm going to be honest. That's different from okay, but it's more important. He dropped her at school, held her close for longer than usual, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the particular sweetness of child who trusted her father to navigate battles she didn't fully understand yet. At Morrison Distribution, the conference center filled early. 200 employees, regional managers from 3 states, executives including Richard Caldwell, who'd flown in from corporate headquarters. The quarterly meeting was Morrison Distribution's performance showcase. Metrics celebrated, innovations praised, careers advanced through visibility. Marcus took seat in the back, same position he'd occupied at January meeting. Victoria sat 3 rows ahead, occasionally glancing back with expression that suggested she was steadying herself for something she'd never done before. Patricia Whitmore sat near the middle, carrying folder whose contents Marcus knew but others didn't. Derek Townsend sat in the front row, positioned for maximum visibility, confident in ways that came from never experiencing doubt. He'd dressed well, expensive suit, silk tie, hair styled with product. He looked like success, and appearance mattered more in corporate environments than actual competence. Richard Caldwell opened the meeting with platitudes about performance and growth. Slides advanced through familiar metrics, revenue up, costs down, efficiency improved. 30 minutes into the presentation, Caldwell's tone shifted. Before we move to departmental updates, I want to recognize outstanding initiative. Derek Townsend has developed another significant innovation that could transform our regional operations. Marcus's hands clenched beneath the table. Derek stood, walked to the front, accepted the laptop connection from Victoria, whose face had gone carefully blank. The slide appeared, Inventory Optimization Initiative, Annual Savings $73K. Marcus's proposal from 3 weeks ago. Dynamic Inventory Management System that would reduce warehouse costs by 22% annually. 43 pages of analysis Derek couldn't have produced because Derek barely understood the statistical modeling that underpinned the recommendations. I've been analyzing our warehouse utilization patterns, identifying inefficiencies in our current inventory rotation systems. Using predictive modeling based on seasonal demand fluctuations and historical data analysis, I've developed optimization protocol that could save $73,000 annually while reducing waste by 31%. Every word matched Marcus's proposal. Every metric, every recommendation, every analytical framework Derek was now explaining with confidence that would evaporate under technical questioning he'd never face. Exceptional work. Richard Caldwell leaned forward, already performing approval. Implementation timeline. Pilot program launches next month. Full rollout by August. Outstanding. I'm approving $8,000 performance bonus and recommending you for regional coordinator position. $75,000 salary increase. The room murmured approval. Several executives nodded. Derek basked in recognition for work he'd stolen so completely, he'd probably convinced himself he'd actually done it. Marcus stood. The scraping of his chair against floor cut through ambient conversation, drawing attention from 200 employees who'd probably never heard him speak in meetings. That's my proposal. Submitted April 28th. I have time-stamped documentation, server logs showing it was downloaded from the shared drive May 2nd, and email confirmation to Victoria Brennan's office. Every metric Derek just presented, every analytical framework, every recommendation, all my work. Again, the room went silent with particular tension that preceded either confrontation or dismissal. Derek's face flushed. Richard Caldwell's expression hardened into irritation. Marcus, this isn't appropriate venue for personal grievances. I've addressed them through proper channels for 8 years. This is the 14th time my work has been stolen and credited to someone else. I have documentation proving pattern of systematic discrimination affecting 73 employees over 6 years. I have statistical analysis showing Black employees receive 2.3-minute performance reviews compared to 5.1 minutes for white employees. I have server logs proving Derek downloaded my proposals within days of submission. I have email evidence showing Gerald Hendricks destroyed HR complaint files to hide institutional discrimination. And I have federal complaint filed with Department of Justice, currently under investigation, with investigators arriving in 48 hours. The room erupted. Executives leaned toward each other, whispering urgently. Gerald Hendricks had gone pale. Derek opened his mouth without producing sound. Richard Caldwell stood, face red. This is completely inappropriate. You're making serious accusations. Victoria Brennan stood. 200 pairs of eyes shifted to her, regional supervisor whose authority exceeded Derek's and whose testimony carried weight that Marcus's never would. She walked from her seat to the front of the room, each step deliberate, and positioned herself beside Marcus in gesture that couldn't be misinterpreted. Then she kissed him. Not romantically, declaratively. Her lips pressed against his for 3 seconds that felt eternal. Public statement that said more than testimony could articulate. When she pulled back, the room had gone absolutely silent. My name is Victoria Brennan. I'm regional supervisor for Ohio operations, and I'm telling you that Marcus Langston is correct. For 3 years, I've signed off on policies I didn't examine carefully. I've approved promotions for employees whose work was stolen from others. I've ignored memos from Patricia Whitmore documenting patterns of discrimination. Derek Townsend has received $127,000 in bonuses for work he didn't do. Gerald Hendricks has destroyed evidence of discrimination complaints spanning 6 years. Richard Caldwell has approved settlements with non-disclosure agreements that buried legitimate grievances. She pulled folder from her jacket, held it up. I have 17 pages of email documentation showing Gerald ordered evidence destruction in direct violation of federal record retention requirements. That's obstruction of justice, criminal offense, and I've submitted everything to Department of Justice as part of federal civil rights investigation. The investigators will be here Thursday morning. Everyone involved in perpetuating discrimination, everyone who buried complaints, everyone who benefited from system that harmed 73 employees, all of you will be held accountable. Richard Caldwell found his voice, though it came out strained. This is conspiracy. Marcus has obviously manipulated you. Nobody manipulated me. I saw patterns I'd ignored. I examined files I should have reviewed years ago. I made choice to stand with truth instead of protecting career. I built partly through advantages I never acknowledged. Derek finally spoke, voice defensive and desperate. This is ridiculous. Marcus is just angry he couldn't compete. You downloaded his proposal from the shared drive May 2nd. Patricia Whitmore stood now, holding her own folder. Server logs don't lie. I have documentation of 14 instances over 3 years where you accessed Marcus's work and presented it as your own. I have statistical analysis proving Black employees at Morrison Distribution face systematic disadvantage. I kept the files Gerald told me to destroy because I knew someday someone would be brave enough to demand justice. Today is that moment. The meeting had devolved into chaos. Executives were leaving, probably to call attorneys. Derek had started toward the exit. Gerald Hendricks was speaking urgently into his phone. Richard Caldwell stood frozen, understanding that comfortable control had just evaporated. Marcus remained still, letting the chaos unfold, thinking about 73 employees who'd fought these battles alone and lost. About James Morrison, who'd been paid $60,000 to disappear. About his daughter Amara learning to hold her head high. About Alicia's voice saying courage means standing firm when standing firm costs everything. The conference room slowly emptied. Marcus, Victoria, and Patricia remained, standing together in space that had witnessed theft and lies and the beginning of reckoning. Victoria looked at Marcus, tears on her face that she didn't bother hiding. "I know this doesn't fix anything, but I'm here now." Marcus thought about the 73 stories, about justice delayed but maybe not denied. "It's worth more than you know, because individual courage is admirable. But institutional change requires people with power choosing to sacrifice that power for truth. You just did that, in front of 200 witnesses." Patricia smiled, expression mixing satisfaction with exhaustion. "Federal investigators arrive Thursday. They'll want to interview everyone. This is just beginning." The weekend passed in surreal suspension. Marcus stayed home with Amara, explaining that her father had done something brave at work, that some people would be angry but others would understand, that change required courage. "Did you lose your job?" "Not yet. They suspended me while they investigate. But baby girl, even if I do lose this job, we'll be okay. Some things matter more than employment, like dignity, like standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves." Morrison Distribution's leadership spent the weekend in emergency meetings. Gerald Hendricks hired criminal defense attorney after realizing document destruction evidence exposed him to federal prosecution. Derek Townsend retained employment lawyer. Richard Caldwell retreated to corporate headquarters where public relations team was crafting narrative. Victoria Brennan spent Saturday documenting everything she remembered from 3 years as regional supervisor. Every promotion she'd approved without examining qualifications, every complaint she'd dismissed, every policy she'd signed without understanding its discriminatory impact. Sunday evening, Catherine Mills called Marcus with update. "Federal investigators arrive Thursday morning. They'll want your testimony first, then Victoria's, then Patricia's. This is going to take months. But Marcus, you've documented systematic discrimination with methodology that academic peer review would validate. You've secured insider testimony from regional supervisor. You've exposed criminal evidence destruction. Cases like this don't usually come together this cleanly." Marcus thanked her, hung up, and sat in the evening quiet thinking about what came next. The investigation would be exhausting. Morrison Distribution would fight. The process would damage his reputation, question his competence. But 73 employees deserved their stories told. Thursday morning, June 3rd, 2024, federal investigators from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division arrived at Morrison Distribution Services at 8 a.m. 3 attorneys, 2 forensic accountants, 1 data analyst, all carrying authority that corporate lawyers couldn't intimidate. They set up in conference rooms Morrison Distribution was legally required to provide. Marcus testified for 6 hours, walked investigators through the 237 pages, explained his methodology, provided server logs and email timestamps and statistical analysis, answered hostile questions from Morrison Distribution's attorneys who tried to suggest he was disgruntled employee exaggerating minor grievances. Catherine Mills objected to every inappropriate question, protected Marcus when interrogation turned abusive. Victoria testified for 4 hours, admitted her failures, acknowledged her advantages, submitted the 17 pages of document destruction evidence, accepted responsibility for signing discriminatory policies while explaining she'd been trained not to question systems she benefited from. Patricia testified for 3 hours, provided context investigators needed, explained how HR complaints were systematically buried, submitted files Gerald had ordered destroyed, corroborated both Marcus's and Victoria's accounts with precision that came from 12 years of documentation. Over following weeks, investigators interviewed 47 current employees, subpoenaed personnel files for all 73 affected employees, hired outside statistical firm to analyze compensation, promotion, and performance evaluation data, discovered patterns that couldn't be explained except by systematic discrimination. Derek Townsend's bonuses were traced back to stolen work through server logs. Total stolen compensation, exceeded $127,000. Federal prosecutors classified it as fraud. Gerald Hendricks's email archive proved he'd systematically destroyed evidence in 2019, 2021, and 2023. Three separate instances of document destruction, each a felony. Criminal prosecutors filed charges in August. Richard Caldwell's involvement was more complex. He'd approved settlements but hadn't directly destroyed evidence. Federal prosecutors offered him choice: cooperate fully with investigation or face conspiracy charges. He chose cooperation, submitted thousands of emails showing institutional pattern Morrison Distribution's leadership had known about and actively concealed. The DOJ hearing occurred June 24, 2024, returning to the moment where the story began. Commissioner Rachel Jenkins reviewed the evidence methodically. 237 pages of Marcus's documentation, Victoria's testimony about institutional blindness, Patricia's preserved files, statistical analysis proving discrimination was systematic, criminal evidence against Gerald Hendricks. The hearing lasted 3 days. Defense attorneys argued that individual incidents weren't pattern, that statistical disparities reflected qualifications rather than discrimination. Federal prosecutors systematically dismantled each defense with data that couldn't be disputed. Marcus testified on day 2, remaining calm under hostile cross-examination. Catherine Mills objected repeatedly, preserved testimony's integrity. Victoria testified on day 3, accepting full responsibility for policies she'd signed without examining, admitting her privilege had blinded her to harm she'd perpetuated, explaining her transformation. Her testimony was devastating, precisely because it came from inside the institution. Commissioner Jenkins delivered preliminary ruling on June 26. This hearing has reviewed extensive evidence of systematic employment discrimination at Morrison Distribution Services. The statistical analysis proves that racial disparities in compensation, promotion, and performance evaluation cannot be explained by legitimate business factors. The document destruction evidence proves that leadership actively concealed discrimination. The testimony establishes pattern and practice of civil rights violations spanning at least 6 years and affecting 73 documented employees. She paused, looking directly at Morrison Distribution's legal team. Federal law exists precisely to address institutional discrimination of this nature. This department recommends immediate consent decree requiring Morrison Distribution Services to implement comprehensive reforms, establish independent monitoring, create restitution fund for affected employees, and submit to 7 years of federal oversight. The consent decree was formalized in August 2024. Morrison Distribution agreed to $2.8 million restitution fund distributed among 73 affected employees. Derek Townsend terminated for cause, banned from employment in logistics industry, required to repay $127,000. Gerald Hendricks, prosecuted criminally, pled guilty to 3 counts of obstruction of justice, sentenced to 14 months federal prison. Richard Caldwell retired immediately, forfeited pension valued at $1.2 million, paid personal fine of $480,000. Complete policy overhaul including blind review processes, independent salary audits, mandatory bias training, third-party complaint review system. 7-year federal monitoring with quarterly compliance reports. Marcus Langston reviewed for promotion by independent committee without Morrison Distribution management involvement. Committee examined his 8 years of work, discovered innovations that had been credited to others, calculated his actual contributions exceeded $340,000 annually, offered him Director of Operations position with $95,000 salary, not as compensation for discrimination but as belated recognition of merit. Victoria Brennan submitted resignation as Regional Supervisor, proposed creating new role, Chief Equity Officer, focused on institutional reform. Morrison Distribution accepted, hired her at lateral salary but stripped of supervisory authority. Her role became implementing the consent decree requirements, reporting directly to federal monitors. Patricia Whitmore promoted to Vice President of Human Resources, replacing Gerald Hendricks, bringing 12 years of documentation expertise to role that required rebuilding trust. July 2025, 1 year after the DOJ hearing. The Cleveland park where Marcus used to take Amara held different meaning now, not refuge from discrimination, but celebration of its partial defeat. Amara was 8 now, working on science fair project titled How My Dad Changed a System, Documentation as Resistance. Her poster board displayed simplified versions of Marcus's methodology, statistical analysis showing patterns, timelines demonstrating systematic nature, photographs of documents proving institutional knowledge. Marcus sat on park bench watching her practice her presentation, explaining to imaginary judges how her father had documented injustice with the same precision scientists used to document experiments. Pride swelled in his chest, not because she knew about discrimination, but because she understood that fighting it required more than anger. Victoria approached carrying coffee she'd learned Marcus preferred, cheap diner blend rather than expensive downtown roasts. They'd developed professional friendship over the past year, colleagues bound by shared experience. 73 Voices Initiative is exceeding projections. 127 mentees in first year across 12 companies. We're getting requests from corporations nationwide. The initiative had been Marcus's idea, mentorship program connecting Black professionals with documented expertise to opportunities that institutional bias typically blocked. Named for the 73 employees whose stories had exposed Morrison Distribution's discrimination. Funded initially by Marcus's portion of the restitution fund. Marcus reviewed the names, young professionals navigating corporate environments, benefiting from mentorship that helped them document patterns, building cases before discrimination accumulated to career-destroying levels. We're changing individual stories, but institutional change requires more than mentorship. It requires constant pressure, federal oversight, consequences when companies backslide. The consent decree lasts 7 years. What happens in year 8? Victoria's expression showed she'd considered this question repeatedly. We build enough individual success stories that companies can't ignore the pattern. We create enough documentation that federal investigators have evidence ready when next Morrison Distribution emerges. We teach enough people Marcus Langston's methodology that institutional discrimination becomes too expensive to maintain. Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number from area code he didn't recognize. Mr. Langston, my name is Jennifer Martinez. I work at Distribution Company in Phoenix. I've been experiencing what you documented at Morrison. Stolen work, blocked promotions. I read about your case. I wondered if you could help me understand how to document what's happening. Marcus's heart rate increased. This was the 4th call like this in past 3 months. Other employees at other companies recognizing patterns, reaching out to the man who'd proved documentation could defeat institutional power. Yes, I can help. Let me connect you with attorney Catherine Mills and show you the methodology I used. Documentation starts with recognizing patterns, then recording them systematically, then building statistical case. It takes time, it takes precision, and it takes courage. But if you're willing to do the work, I'll show you how. He scheduled call for later that week, hung up and looked at Victoria. They keep calling. Employees at other companies experiencing same discrimination. All of them asking how to document what they're experiencing. That's your legacy, Marcus. Not just changing Morrison Distribution. Teaching others how to change their institutions. 73 Voices Initiative isn't just mentorship. It's documentation training. You're creating army of employees who know that courage requires preparation. Amara ran over, excited about her science project, wanting to show them the section about federal consent decrees and how government oversight forced institutional change. Marcus pulled her close, breathing in the particular sweetness of daughter who'd watched her father fight and learned that holding your head high meant standing up when standing up looked impossible. The park stretched around them, children playing, families gathering, ordinary life continuing. But Marcus carried those battles with him, in the scars that remained from years of fighting alone, in the victory that felt less like triumph and more like hard-won survival, in the knowledge that 73 employees had received justice, but thousands more that still faced discrimination. He thought of Alicia's voice. Some victories change one life. The important victories change systems. His phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another employee asking for help documenting discrimination. Marcus answered, knowing this would be his work now. Not logistics coordination, but liberation coordination, helping others build cases that institutions couldn't bury. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over as long as institutions protected themselves better than they protected people. But Marcus Langston had proved that documentation defeated institutional power, that individual courage could force systemic change, that 73 stories told together were louder than corporate denials could silence. He sat in Cleveland Park on July afternoon, watching his daughter prepare presentation about how her father had changed a system, and he understood that this was legacy worth building, not comfort, not safety, not even victory in conventional sense, but the harder achievement of teaching others that courage was learnable, documentation was powerful, and institutional change was possible if people refused to accept injustice quietly. The phone kept ringing. Marcus kept answering. And somewhere across America, employees were learning to document their experiences with precision that would eventually, inevitably, force accountability that comfort-seeking institutions spent millions avoiding. Some fights change one person. This fight had changed 73, and the work continued. The phone kept ringing, and Marcus Langston kept teaching that dignity didn't require permission. It required documentation, courage, and the stubborn refusal to let institutions define your worth through their failure to recognize it.